Welcome to the first Edge in Education in like 2.5 years, which is awesome. So if you, I'm sure many of you are aware, but I'll go ahead and say it anyway. The purpose of Edge in Education, and this has been going on in the school for many years, is about bringing parents into the conversation about a lot of the thinking that is going on inside of the school around what we are doing or hope to be doing with kids. And we believe at ISP that the education of children is a partnership between parents, between the school, and between the larger community, whether it's the community in Prague or the intellectual community that is out there in the world thinking about how we best educate kids. And as I've been thinking about shifts in education and the kinds of things that we are aspiring to do with kids, I think a little bit about historically. So as you know, I'm American. I was educated in American school systems, and I think about American education. And so I'm going to speak just for a moment about that, and then contextualize it to an international context. 100 years ago, schools were really divided into a couple of big camps. There were public schools whose purpose was predominantly about teaching reading and writing and teaching kids how to follow directions so they could work in a factory. That was the purpose of public schools by and large. And there were private schools, by and large, whose purpose was to teach kids leadership, the classics, and how to go to great universities and run things. And the world was split into these two domains. And over the past 100 years, a number of things have happened. One thing that's happened is those domains have come together, creating greater access for more kids for lots of opportunities. And we've also learned a whole lot about teaching and learning. When we think about teaching and learning, it's not just the classics, or it's not just learning how to follow directions. But what we've learned about teaching and learning is that it is the application and the action around what we do where actually the greatest learning often takes place. So if you think about your greatest, whether they're academic or life lessons in your life, it is often not about, oh, I learned so much on that AP exam or that IB exam when I blah, 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 blah. No, it was probably an application of your learning in some context. You said, oh, I learned so much. I was so inspired. I learned so much about myself, about learning, about the world, all of those things. So at ISP, we're actually trying to bring those things together. And in international schools, many international schools around the world were founded in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and 70s, and they were a reflection of US American education. Most schools, like this one, were founded by American educators in the American context, and they become increasingly international, right? Because what we know in the international context is that it's not just about American education. It's much, much bigger than that. Things like culture and language and solving problems in an international context, which for international educators, and I consider myself now an international educator, having been in international schools for a decade, and because we believe in the larger context. So how do we bring that stuff together? Well, we bring that stuff together is we don't forget that kids need executive functioning skills, like how to follow directions, right? We haven't forgotten that. Sometimes they've forgotten it, but we haven't forgotten it. And we haven't forgotten the kids need to know stuff, right? They really do need to know stuff. And the greatest learning happens in the application of that learning. And the challenge for schools today is if school for many, many, many years under the factory model has lived in these two domains, and we're adding this domain, and we haven't, by the way, added time to the day, because I haven't figured out quite how to do that, nor have we added time to the school year, and we've added lots. How do we do that? And so what we're trying to do as best we can is take this application construct and apply it within these other domains. And we have an expert who knows how to do that. So, we have invited Aaron, who again is an expert in his field, has designed and worked in the application of learning principles around the world. We've been swapping common stories because he was running a school when I was in Singapore, or he was involved in a school when I was in Singapore that we were modeling our work after. So it's really cool stuff. And yesterday I shared with a group of our middle school students who've been working on projects with Aaron over the course of last year, the notion of empathy to action. So that's kind of the key work that Aaron and his team do. And the thing that I talked about the middle school kids about was that we often talk about the action part. We often talk about, getting worked up about changing something so that we can be change makers. And that's really important. And one of the things I shared is the more you discover and understand injustice, the more you need to get loud and proud about what it is you want to do. However, you don't start there. Where you start with is empathy. You start with understanding the people, understanding the problem, understanding the context. And our kids need to do both. They don't need to just start with a poster and a cause, but they need to understand the underneath. What are the values that you're fighting for? What are the causes of the problem in the first place? How do you understand the people that are being impacted? And that leads to action. And that's what we're hoping to achieve with our kids. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Aaron again, who's been working with our team for a year, virtually, because, and but is now here working with our teams, and we're going to continue to be working with Aaron over the long haul. I'm going to stay for about half the time, and then I've got a meeting at 9:30 I need to run to. Teresa will be closing us up. Again, welcome to the first education. We're really excited you're here. Okay, Aaron.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. We are going to be talking a little bit about what it actually means to be a change maker, right, and fight for, or even work with to create, right, sustainable, harmonious futures. We're going to look at, what are some student examples that have been happening here at ISP, right? And then we as a community are going to get a chance to talk. We're going to be able to look at some evidence. We're going to maybe think about some of our own change maker journeys, and we're really going to unpack, what it means to be a change maker. And I want to sort of start off with this reflection on the mission. Right? When I saw this idea of being curious, competent, compassionate change makers, I was like, that's a beautiful progression. Right? We have to teach kids to be curious. We have to be able to use and apply our skills and our competencies. Right? We have to make sure that we have that empathy for others, right? So that we can make change. And if you can find a way to put those things together into high quality, best practice education, right, then we really are preparing kids to make a huge difference in the world. And so that was one of the things that really connected me to ISP in the first place, right? And then to what we've been doing specifically for this first pilot year have been looking at what does it mean to take action for sustainability, specifically within sciences and this Changemaker program, right? And we're saying, how can we leverage this idea of action for sustainability and have this be what it means to be a change maker? And so, a little bit about me before we begin, and then we'll dive into Inspire Citizens. My name is Aaron Moniz. I'm co-founder of Inspire Citizens. We work with about 60 different international schools around the world, about 100,000 different teachers and students on a yearly basis. And my background is in interdisciplinary project-based learning, all focused on using all your subjects in order to do action projects, do service, right? Try to take your learning and make it impactful within your community. And I was an educator for about 10 years before I went into consulting. And I actually grew up in international schools, graduated from the IB program, and really, I lived in communities like this with all of you. And so I'm just really glad because that experience changed my life. having my basketball team with 9 different nationalities, having my classrooms with all these different discussions and perspectives ultimately changed who I became and how I looked at the world, right? And I want to make sure that every student has an opportunity to continue in these systems, but when they're in these systems, really know how to become curious, compassionate, and make change by connecting with people in international schools. And so this is something that's really important to us, right? This idea of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, this idea that the world needs our help as schools to try and see if we can embed sustainable development and global citizenship into what we do. There are a lot of great organizations that exist and NGOs and things that governments are doing to try and create change, but also if we can leverage, right, the millions of people that are involved in school systems across the world, right, to think about sustainability, to think about equity, to think about human rights, right, then that's another way that we can be creating change and we can help to be supporting some of the issues that exist in our community. And so I'm going to circle back to this target and we're going to look at maybe some targets that speak to you later on, all right? And a lot of what we do when we talk to students and when we talk to schools and we talk to educators is this idea that if there's any way that we can use our talents, our skills, our profession, and we can link that to some other greater world need, that's when we help to find our purpose. That's when we help to change our jobs into a vocation. That's when we get students to understand they're not just learners. They're people that have agency and they have purpose and they can do things, right? And we're gonna run this protocol later on today as well, right? Because when we do find the way that our needs, that our passions and our talents meet world needs, that's when we can really make a difference. And so, again, when we talk to schools, and I think we were having a conversation about this earlier too, is that schools already exist, right, where they're equipping students with the skills that we need. We have beautiful community members and community stakeholders. We have awesome organizations that we work with, right? And if we can help schools to say, you know, why don't we take a focus for sustainability? Why don't we take a focus on empathy and impact? What if we take a focus on we want to develop change makers, and together as the thousands of students, right, and thousands of parents within this community, how can we leverage the things that we're already doing with a slight change so that we focus on doing good in our communities? And it's not that challenging, right? With all the schools that we work at, there's a few slight tweaks that we can do to optimize our existing systems so that we can move forward for sustainability and action in our communities. And I want us to just to think about this on a greater level for a moment, right? We've got a grade 1 class, you know, let's just say we've got 80 kids within a class or 60 kids within a class. Each one of them does an action project and they think, you know what, I'm really important, or I've learned to connect with nature in this way. And they want to go home and talk to their parents about it. And now that 60 has just turned into, you know, 180 people that have now been impacted by this idea of wanting to support nature. Right? But if we can do that in a grade 1 class, and we can do that across 11 grade levels at the school, right? So now we've got 2,000 people just within a community that are caring about environmental issues or caring about connection with nature. And if this school can connect with another school and follow a similar type of approach just within this region, right, we're talking about tens of thousands of people within our international school communities that are using these small approaches to be able to make a big change. And then when we look at our international schools across the world, right, if I work with 60 schools and other organizations or other teachers are doing this kind of work, right, by slight shifts to what we're already doing, there's millions of people that can be impacted. And I want to talk about a few of those stories today. This is the reason why we as Inspire Citizens exist. We believe that schools can become centers for community impact. Right? And we just have to figure out what are our tools and what are our approaches to be able to do so, and how is it that we can work with our community members and stakeholders so that we can expand that impact and that we can make sure that kids have the skills to make a change. And really quickly, I'll walk into if that is our why, I want to talk to you a little bit about our what and our how. right? We run an organization called Inspire Citizens. There's about 7 of us that work on the team. We're situated around the world, and the work that we do is focused on how do we take these bigger ideas of sustainable development, of reducing inequalities, of health and well-being, right? Of looking out for the planet, of working together to create change. How do we take these ideas and embed them into schools? And then again, specifically, we focus on this one. How do we bring education for sustainable development and global citizenship into schools? We help schools set up whole school models. Because if you have just one teacher doing it in isolation, right, then that's great, right? But if they leave, then maybe the program no longer exists, right? Or if you have maybe a couple people doing it and it's conflicting with another value, then maybe they won't get the support that they need. So how is it that we can work with administrators and we can work with schools to say, this is how we're going to get as many people as possible to develop the systems so that a school can be change makers, can be focused on service, can be focused on sustainable development. We use an approach, right, which is any inquiry approach. It's any sort of service learning or project-based learning approach. And we base it around these 4 sort of parts of a cycle. What do you truly care about? How can we find a community need or a community issue that we want to develop empathy or compassion for? Right? How do we then figure out opportunities for our students to authentically investigate, connect with people, do interviews, go and collect the data, go and do the field visits so that they're not just learning about it, from a book, right? They're feeling it. They're there. They're authentically getting the data so that they can see how this thing that they care about is impacting the community. And then, how do we make sure that we're using our skills, our competencies, the math, the standards, right? The writing skills to be able to design an impact project, right? Or take action in their community. And so we look at what kind of action might work, which community partners can we work with, and how is that going to make a difference based off of what you care about. And so that empathy to impact, or care, aware, able impact, is how we work with schools. All right. We also run teacher training programs online. We run student leadership focused events. We run student media hosting, and we also have a podcast. So if you're a podcast person and you want to listen to students from around the world tell their changemaker journeys, then check out Empathy to Impact podcast on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, whatever you like. All right. So I'm going to hand it over to you, and the rest of the session is going to be a lot more, let's look at this, let's discuss this. Let's look at this, let's discuss this. But my first challenge for you is, 1, get to know the people at the table beside you, and choose one of these sustainable development goals. Which one do you think is the most important for us, to solve or address, and why? All right? Take a few minutes, meet the people at your table, have a look. I want to sort of take this into context, right? Because there were different conversations that I heard. And one thing that really resonated with me as I was listening to these different conversations is they're all important. They're all interconnected. They're all intertwined, right? But what are the mechanisms in which what do we need to develop in terms of competencies and skills for our kids to be able to understand them, to be able to experience them, in order to have compassion so that they care about them and not just choose only one way to go about something? How can we look at all sides of a story and all people that are involved? That's an important part about sustainable development. That's an important part of change, right? And so I want to look at some examples of what that might actually look like with our students. This one is an example that I will share from another school. All right, and one thing that I love about the Sustainable Development Goals as an opportunity for action is that they have these targets, and those 17 goals are the ones that you see that you might use with middle school and high school students. There's also the elementary version of them, which is the Good Life Goals, and there's also the early years version of these same topics that are broken down into age-appropriate discussions. Right? This is a 6-year-old. He'll tell you that, don't worry. But this is a 6-year-old from Seoul Foreign School. And they were doing it was an integrated unit where they had robotics, right? They were using the Sustainable Development Goals, and they were using argumentative writing to talk about what was an issue that was important to them, what's something that they wish that they could solve, and how could they use their imagination and their machines in order to make something that could make a difference. Right? And so they designed their prototypes, they used their simple machines in science to say, here's how we were going to make a difference. And because they couldn't work with anybody else, because they couldn't have parents on campus, they turned it into a TV show. And so now the TV show of this young engineers is the way that they were sharing their idea of, this is important to me, and I know that I can design some solutions to make change, and I want you to hear about it. Right? So let's listen to Jake for a moment.
My name is Jake. I am 6 years old, almost a half. So the problem is trash in the ocean, which there's still trash in the ocean. So there's the boat that comes that has a radar. So it, with the claw, it picks up the trash, but that doesn't have a simple machine like this. You can't pick it up. And then it puts it in the boat, and then it takes it back to land, and then it puts it in the recycle bin.
There.
Wheel and axle. This is the axle, and this is the wheel and axle. It spins around, and then there's a line on it that pulls the stuff out of the ocean. Laser. Security camera, but also laser. The laser burns the trash. It's going to pick up all the trash, so there will be no more trash in the world, and then the animals won't get sick.
So again, I told you we would have lots of opportunities to discuss. Right? But think about this idea of sustainable development. Think about this idea of curiosity, competencies, right? Compassion, and change. Right? What did you see in this video? What did you think about? What does this video make you wonder? All right? Turn and talk at your tables. Everybody has something that they're connecting with. Everybody has, some way that they're talking about the importance of this type of teaching, or maybe some ways that we as a community, can, improve, or what are some things that we can do at home to be able to support, right? And so I love the fact that, everybody is having these conversations, being like, yes, it's integral, and this is the kind of work that we need to be doing going forward, right? And that's not just, us. There's a lot of research now that's talking about the fact that if we do sustainability, environmental education, right, that helps us to, if you talk about agency, you talk about growth, you think about critical thinking, right? You think about if there's an issue that kids really care about and they want to read about it, they want to go out and find out what are the numbers, they want to practice their growth and observation and their measurement skills, right? Because they're trying to figure out an issue that matters to them. So there's a higher correlation with academic achievement for kids that are saying, I can use this somewhere. I can do something with my skills, right? And a lot of other research talks about the fact that, like, if we can have these conversations, or if these changemaker groups can talk to each other to say, let's work together to start Earth Friends Club. Let's work together to be able to do that, right? You're strengthening connections between kids, right? But you're also, if my learning is not just a sheet of math, right? It is a thing that exists to the world. You're starting to develop some of these skills for transfer that they'll be able to use in other contexts, right? So now if I know that in this context, I knew that my math was helping an outside factor, well, if I'm in science, is there a way that I can transfer those skills? If I'm in humanities, is there a way that I can transfer those skills? So there's this idea of helping us to develop transfer, right? Also here, we talk about empathy. Right? The more that we can get students to figure out the fact that there are issues that we're trying to solve, we don't want them to just look at the change that they can make or the solution, right? But we want them to say, well, why does this exist? Right? Why do you care about it? Why might some people not care about it? Why might some people not know about it? And how can we help to develop empathy so that our students are saying, yeah, this is important, right? We should look more into this. And so there's a lot of research that says that happens. And as well, when we're using sustainability education or environmental education, right, this idea of developing agency, developing that identity of a change maker is something that's also important. Like even within the Changemaker projects that we had the exhibition for yesterday, a really common thread in the process was it didn't, a couple of times students were saying it didn't really go the way that I wanted it to, but I learned that I could. I learned that I could reach out to this adult and try and organize this. I learned that I could get these kids together and try this. I learned that I could. And part of establishing that identity as a change maker or a change agent is an important quality, it's an important life skill, as well as developing our competencies, as well as developing our skills that we need, right? And so I want to talk about some of the great things that are happening here, right? And I want us to, again, think about what are the impacts, for education at ISP, right? This was sort of the approach that I spoke about earlier where we said, when we're designing a unit, we'll spend some time to say, how do we create provocation so students do actually on a stretch day go to the cafeteria, right? And they or I don't know where it is, or in their classrooms, for example, right? And they do a waste audit. And they say, this is how much paper, this is what's in my snacks, this is my this is my this. And they can look at it and say, I think there's an issue here. Why does that issue exist, right? And then we develop the inquiry by saying, well, can we count it, right? Do you talk to, do we even know that this is a bad thing? Are there other strategies? Do I have to do this? And so by using these different types of inquiries, right, we can figure out the math behind it, we can figure out the science behind it, we can figure out maybe why some of these things are happening so that when we're using our science skills, when we're using our argumentative writing skills, when we're using our project planning skills, we've picked something that we think matters to us and that we think will have a change, right? And what a change looks like, for a 3-year-old is different than an 11-year-old, which is different than an 18-year-old, right? But what's most important is that if we can scope and sequence these opportunities throughout 18 years of somebody's life, right? Like that's important. And if it starts out with advocacy and sharing, or it starts out with, I'm gonna change the way that I do this for myself, right? That's really, really important. And so I want to look at a couple of examples. Oh, and in this context, we were specifically focusing on a work with science vertical team, right? And we are focusing on the sustainable development goals and embedding some of these strategies into units across the school so that we could take this idea of developing curiosity, developing our competencies, and getting students to care in order to make change. Right? And so far, just in this year, right, there's already a lot of really great things happening at this school, and another exciting addition is that all of these different grade levels now have some kind of a unit where we have said, you had this awesome science unit, how can we enhance it through sustainability in action? How can we help you to, for example, look at sustainability, food waste, and our classroom practices, or it was food, it was paper, it was recycling, yeah. Right? And then so it was all about personal changes. It was all about, how is it that we can, as a classroom community, change our practices, and what difference could it make, and how can we use our science data to be able to say that we did something, right? And we were going to then, as a class, use that to try and teach out to another class, but there were some logistical challenges with that this year, so the fact that each of our classroom communities had evidence and data about the fact that we did something differently and we made an impact within our community was great. Right? And then you've got different grade levels, like even the group 4 science right now in the DP program, right? There's about 11 different sustainability issues that they're looking at in terms of like, how is it that we can do, how can we go, farm to table at our own school? How can we do raised gardening beds so that we're looking at what are some airflow issues that exist at our school? How could we use energy more efficiently? And, what are some things that we could create as prototypes so that they are now focusing on this idea of designing opportunities for change, even if they are theoretical, even if they are a design for an app, even if they are a blueprint for something, right? We're still using the skills all the way from work in the gardens and loving plants to advocacy in our own classroom systems to outreach into the community to designing machines, apps, and systemic prototypes to improve a school's functioning. Right? And those are just some of the things that have happened within this 1 year of curriculum design and will improve and be strengthened, right, in the future years. Right? And there's also a Changemaker program, which is a really interesting addition for this year, where we said, if we do really want kids to be change makers, we can build it into the curriculum, but we can also try and scaffold these skills for students to be able to pick an issue, any issue that they care about within the school community or within our local community, and we need to equip them with the skills to be able to listen to others, to be able to work together as a team, to do a needs analysis, to do a SWOT analysis, to do a root cause analysis, to use an action planning protocol, to use, sort of like a progress monitoring team building protocol. And so we did these different workshops where kids had an opportunity to learn about those skills and then apply it to a Changemaker project. Learn about the skills, apply it to a Changemaker project. And then over the year, the project itself progressed, and we just did this sort of exhibition yesterday where they were able to share their progress, share their impact, and share the change that they've had. And so between those different units, right, and this type of Changemaker project, there were some really great things that were done at the school to help this Changemaker, right, mentality come to life. And so what we're going to do now, and again, I told you I will show provocations, right, and we will discuss. We'll show provocations, we will discuss, and then at the end we'll get a chance to look at this within our own context. But I want to introduce you to, right, some nature scientists at ISP, right? And if you can see in here, right, there's some gardens, right? We've got actual plants that are growing out of here. We've got actual food that we're making. And I mean, Carrie, you can help me to fill in some of the details. But if we're teaching about measurement, we're teaching about observation, we're teaching about recording, we're teaching about all these things that are important in science, why don't we do it with actual food? Why don't we do it with actual gardens? Why don't we use that seed that was once that seed in your hand that you could look at, and now it's a plant that you're pulling out of the ground? Like, think about, and that connection, that responsibility, that care, right? And you're using your skills in context to help kids love nature, right? And if we're talking about scoping and sequencing sustainability and action for sustainability, right? Like, that's the important stuff. Get them to love nature, feel comfortable in nature, and use their skills in a way that we're developing a connection to our food, to our planet, to our environment. Literally the provocation of a seed, right? We're talking about that idea of like, what's going to happen, right? How can you use your skills to be able to tell the journey? Right? That seed was yours, right? That garden is yours, right? You're making food. You're making pollen for other creatures, right? You're looking at how can you help a plant to grow? If it's yellow, and why is it yellow? And what can you do to make things differently? You think about curiosity, you think about the competencies, right? And you think about, that's mine, right? That was my beet. That was my spinach, right? That was my, or look at these other things that I can now do at home, or did you know that, right? If you're talking about developing the competencies that are necessary for sustainable change, right? We're not talking about, what is your debate skills so that you can argue against your opponents. We're talking about love the earth and know that you can do things to make it more healthy. And do it when you're 2, do it when you're 3, do it when you're 4, as many times as possible, and put those skills into context so that you can love the world so you can make a change for the world, right? And that's the kind of work that it starts with, right? And then I want to share maybe another 2 examples. These are examples that were given to me, so forgive me if I'm not telling the whole story, right? With the teachers can tell you a little bit more about it, right? But this one is actually a student journal, right? And so this is, this is a student's reflection, right? Where they were saying, throughout my unit, we learned about, biofuels, we learned about different types of sustainable energy, right? They looked at all these different sustainable development goals, and this one really spoke to this student. And they were saying, you know what, I think that this is important, and I want to figure out more about what this is and what this system is, right? And so by learning about, biofuels and their impact on the planet, where they come from, why is it that people maybe don't know about it, what are the systems that are, propagating our use of other types of fuels, how can I maybe do something about that? How can I learn more about it for myself, right? Is there something that I could do? Is there an action that I could take? But really, I'm going to use my curiosity. I'm going to use my skills in math and science, right? I'm going to use my nonfiction reading and my research skills to be able to figure out something that matters to me, and I think it also matters to the world. And then, you know what? I think that this is maybe so important that I want to find a way to actually share this information with somebody else. And is there another grade level, or are there maybe some other students that I think would also find this interesting? And is there a way that I can use my speaking skills and my creativity to be able to share this information that I think is important to me? Again, right, this person is not going to be combating the oil industry, right? But at the same time, if this biofuel matters to you, why not? Right? You're gonna help us with that, right? But in a way, being able to share, being able to use your creativity to advocate, to be able to inspire other people, right? And then what you see is really interesting about this is that this person decided that once they wanted to make the book and make the resources, make some quizzes and games that taught other students, right? Worked with teachers to try and say, do I have permission to come into your class to run a session? What would be a good time? How might I make my lessons, appropriate, to your class? And then being able to just go in there and actually work with the students, right? Is one example of I think there was 40 or 50 different projects of this sort that were happening in this class, right? And so another example too, that a teacher shared this photo with me. These students were looking at how is it that I can work on food provision, right, with different organizations within my community? How is it that I could work with, an NGO, or how is it that I could be, taking this idea of the fact that I want to make sure people have, right? And how can I go and engage with that? How can I support it? How can I use my research that compelled me to now, go and do something about it, right? And so their call to action was to share their process, to share the fact that, there are organizations that do this, to do indirect support. And again, this is part of sustainability, right? It's not specifically just plant and environment. This is social sustainability. This is no poverty and food provision. This is reduced inequalities, right? This is partnerships, right, to help people with needs to be able to get. And it's just so great that when our kids and their families are able to extend from their learning to be able to go and work in a community, right? And I love that. And so in the interest of time, I want to show us one more example, right? And right, this is a reflection protocol, right, that we were using with Changemakers, right? And this was just a way that we could say, how did you become more aware of an issue? How did you, the Changemaker program, like I was telling you about, is pick an issue that matters to you, right? Figure out how is it that you can use these needs analysis skills? How is it that you can use these root causes? How is it that you can, conduct your research and put together an action plan? Now, if we work on, here are some project management tools, here are some other tools, how can you use those to put something together to go and do something in your community? Right? And there are several different action projects that came out of it. Some were forming but are going to happen next year or happen over summer, and that's okay too. Right? And then at the end, we just reflected on the process. And so this was an opportunity for students to say, here's my journey, and I hope that this inspires you too. Right? So have had the pleasure to have many conversations with Lexi over time. And so I want to share this with you.
The issue that I care deeply about is homelessness. Homelessness has always been an important issue to me because I have lived in cities with large homeless populations. 700 million people still live in extreme poverty. I became more aware of this issue by my roots. I've always lived in cities with large homeless populations. Seattle with tent cities due to a lack of housing, and Prague with sky-high rents. I actively donated food to the homeless through a Facebook group called Help Prague's Homeless. I reached out to the founders of a new NGO, Friendship Prague, to see if I could support their initiatives at ISP. I created a Friendship Prague group at ISP with like-minded students to hold collections and other campaigns to support the homeless. I participated in the Expand Your Impact to learn how to expand my reach. Homelessness spans several SDGs, but most closely aligns with SDG 1 of extreme poverty. The leadership tools I used in my process were proactiveness, community building, organization, management skills, and promotion. I prepared for action or applied my leadership skills by creating a blueprint for the campaigns at ISP, recruiting a team of like-minded students, assigning tasks and managing my team, adhering to deadlines and organizing our time efficiently, problem-solving during the course of campaigns, being flexible, and combining the friendship and dignity collections, working with key stakeholders at ISP to create partnerships, involving students from all school sections, promoting the campaigns widely using all available channels. Here are some images from my first drive in November. Here are some images from my March drive, which was a combined friendship and dignity collection for both Ukraine and the homeless. These are some photos of my other initiatives. The first photo is a homeless distribution walk, and the second photo is a Christmas sock drive where we handed out Christmas socks to the homeless in December. Here's my final impact and the change that I made. My impact is ongoing as I continue to foster this project and try to apply what I have been doing on a broader scale. Here's a timeline of what I have accomplished. My first drive was in November. Then I had a Christmas sock collection and delivery. I had a second drive, which was a very large drive where I combined Friendship Prague and Dignity. And then I had 3 homeless distribution walks that are every month. One thing I learned about myself was running a large-scale school-wide community service campaign can be daunting, but with the right partnership, tools, and teams, I can accomplish a lot in a short amount of time. For my first drive, we collected over 854 items in 5 days. My call to action or advice to another changemaker is to broaden my initiatives with the hopes that my efforts locally can be globalized, to work with other international schools across Europe to establish friendships with the homeless in their cities, help them to run local initiatives to support and combat homelessness in their local communities. I also hope to create a social media platform to further promote our efforts.
You know, something that's really touching about this idea is that, again, like, if we can create programs, if we can create opportunities, if we can create spaces by which we're nurturing and we're allowing for this to happen, right? Like, I'm sure that, you know, Lexi is a very passionate person that would have found a way to, like, you know, get things done. And also now that Lexi had an opportunity to work with other students, right? They now say, wow, like, oh, and what skills were you using? Or, oh, that same skill that I got, like, you applied it in this kind of way. Well, maybe now I can go use that. And so when we had this Changemaker program, it was a way for kids to just get together and say, this is not working for me. What are you doing to make it work, right? I got this huge thing that I'm trying to do as a social media campaign, but like 4 of my team members like aren't even showing up. Like, what are some accountability tools that you use to get your other team members on board? And then these groups of students can talk to one another, right? And so any way that we as a school can continue to nurture these spaces, continue to nurture the development of these skills, continue to scope and sequence these into our curriculum, but also into our programs, especially as we transition, right? Then there's going to be, right, we are going to have some really opportunities to keep this going. If we can continue doing this work that we're already doing, that we're already seeing such amazing results from, and we build that into like the PYP, we build this into, you know, the projects that we're going to be doing, we build this into, you know, some of the frameworks that we're adjusting to, we just get to be able to expand this impact, right? And so what I wanted to do at the end, and I don't know if this is going to be, you know, time for it, and I don't even know if you want to, and you can decide if you want to do this or if we just want to open to questions. Right, but I wanted you to have an opportunity to look at these same issues, look at these same sustainable development goal targets, and go through a mini version of what a lot of our students have gone through, right? So what we've been doing with a lot of these units is saying, well, you know that you're a good writer, you know that you're creative about this, you know that you care more about this. Is there a need that you might want to address, right? And so we do that longer through 6 weeks, through 12 weeks, right? Or else we might pick a specific issue and within it allow for freedom for students to be able to choose, right? And then once they say, well, I like this, I'm really interested in this, I want to go this direction and I care about this thing, right? And they choose their target, we then help students to say, well, what's an action that you could take, right? Do you want to maybe just do it yourself? Do your own composting or growing or gardening, right? Or plastic audit, in your own house, right? Or is there a lifestyle change that you want to adapt, right? Or do you want to creatively express because you want other people to know about it, right? Or do you want to make something? Do you want to design something? Do you want to use your hands and your tools to be able to build something? You want to go to the idea lab and be able to see if you can even make a prototype that maybe one day will become a machine, but right now is just your blueprint or your model, right? Are you going to run a social enterprise? Right? Do you want to have a little business that supports something? Do you want to run a workshop? Do you want to make media? Do you want to create a podcast? Do you want to make video? Right? What is your way that you can create change? All right? And so let's just do this for 5 minutes and then we'll close up on questions. My invitation to you now is to, when I say go, there are some target cards, some SDG, Sustainable Development Goal targets. Right? We know these big 17 goals are laid out by the UN. But how do you do no hunger? Right? Well, there's actually some targets to say, here are some things that we can actually do to help. If you're passionate about, sustainable lifestyles, there's some really great ways that we can help, right? So my invitation to you and my challenge is to pick one of these Sustainable Development Goal targets, pick an action, right? And think about how you might design your own personal Changemaker project, just like you've seen these kids do, just like you have seen these students do within the curriculum. And because, right, picking an action, picking a need, I don't want to necessarily go paper, so if you want to use your phone to take a picture and mark these down, then go for it, right? And so right now, let's spend 5 more minutes debriefing off of anything that you've heard in the conversation, right, and trying to find one of these targets over here. I'll put the action slide back up on the screen and then meet some people, have a little bit of a debrief, think about your personal Changemaker story, and then we'll come back together in about 5 minutes for closing and questions. Last thing that I just want to say is that, again, any way that we can help to support this idea, curious, competent, compassionate Changemakers, that's going to be the work that unites us as a community. That's the work that we were saying could unite all of our international schools within the country if we are doing different types of projects, right? Right? And then again, if we look at this momentum, if we look at the great things that our kids have been doing just within, they've always been doing great things at ISP, and now that ISP is saying, what are some more ways that we can take this idea of change and make it come to life in our curriculum and through our other programs, there's been some amazing things that have happened, right? And so, again, thank you for thinking about how you can nurture this at home. Thank you for thinking about what are some systemic ways that we can, connect, or we can use our skills or NGOs that we work with that might, be able to support the curriculum and support this change making. And again, we talked about this at the beginning where, schools can become centers, for impact. Right? Think about if now we've got 11 different grade levels that have 50 kids per grade level that are doing different sustainability and action projects, and we can think about how to support that as a community, or the changes that might be happening at home, or just the self as agent, the fact that I can create change. Right? That's thousands of people that are already being impacted just at our school alone. Right? And so thank you for being part of that process. Thank you for thinking about ways that we can extend this impact. And again, we are the people that can help our kids to get that edge in education. And on behalf, right, of everybody that will be impacted by your nurturing, by your support, by your ideas, right, the other parents that we want to bring in to be able to think about this, know this, think about how they can contribute, thank you. Because schools can be places for change, and you being a part of it really does have a big impact. And I'm here for questions if you have any. Otherwise, enjoy your coffee, enjoy the new friends that you've made, and thank you for being here. Thank you.